Hello, good afternoon, Dr. Jasmine.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
How are you?
Ma'am, you're not audible.
Acha, I'm not audible?
You're not audible.
Okay, just
Yes,
a minute.
now you are, ma'am.
I'm audible now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, okay.
How
So
are you,
let me
ma'am?
know when we have to start, so I'll start.
Yes, ma'am. Just in 2, 3 minutes we'll start. All right, ma'am. All right.
Namaskar, Rajiv sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
All right, all right. So I welcome you all. So Amity Economic Society, Amity University Punjab invites you all to an expert talk on research paper writing. The speaker of the session is Dr. Smita Sharma, Chairperson, Department of Economics, Punjab University, Chandigarh. She has 20 years of teaching experience. Her areas of specialization are economics of public finance and policy and development economics. She has several publications in national and international reputed journals. She has presented numerous papers related to public finance and policy in national and international conferences. She had worked on a project on performance based budgeting, guidelines for stakeholders in collaboration with NAPSCON NABARD for Department of Planning, Government of Punjab in 2015. She is a member of Indian Economic Association, Punjab Development Society, and World Interdisciplinary Network for Institutional Research. On behalf of Amity Economic Society, Amity University Punjab, I welcome you, ma'am, with folded hands. Thank you so much, ma'am, for accepting our invitation for this lecture session. Thank you for taking out your time from your busy schedule, ma'am. Thank you so much. So now I would like to invite Dr. Smita Sharma for this session.
Thank you, Dr. Jasmine. First of all, I would like to thank
Over to you,
you
ma'am.
and Amity University for inviting me for this talk. And it's a pleasure to see my colleague, Dr. Rajiv, and Dr. Suman, who was my student also and now a colleague.
Yes,
And
yes, ma'am.
Dr.
We all, yes, ma'am.
So it's
Yes,
really,
ma'am. Even ma'am,
very,
Dr.
very
Panika is
pleasurable to
also
see
here.
all of you. For me, too,
Yes.
I'm feeling very, very, and Dr. Panika Jain.
Yes, we three are students of you,
Welcome.
ma'am.
So I just hope that it will be an interesting session because when Dr. Jasmine asked me for the session, I said, okay, let me share my experience in publishing because I think all the people who are there in this particular talk, all of you are also publishing I think a lot and well. So I can only hope that my experiences are able to make your journey a bit easier, or maybe it can help you in sharing you can say navigating the shared challenges. So with this, I'll start with the presentation. So first of all, let me share my PPT. Isha, will you help me in this? Yeah. Dr. Jasmine, is my PPT visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you, Isha. हाँ जी. अच्छा. Control? N. We in Punjab University are using more or less this Google Meet platform. So if there is a, so is it okay with everybody? Can I start with the presentation?
Sure, ma'am. It is visible.
Okay, sure. That is good and sufficient. Okay, thank you. So the title for today's talk is How to Write a Research Paper. And as I said in the beginning only, I'm going to share my experiences in publishing, the challenges which I faced. And I would like to confess that when I started sending papers for publications, it was more or less, I was just a beginner. I had no experience in publishing because at my undergraduate, postgraduate, even in my MPhil, I had never learned how to publish papers. And in our research methodology coursework also, we were taught, how to do research, but how to do research that eventually it gets published also, that somehow remained a challenge for me. So with this backdrop, sorry, yeah. These are the various stages. First of all, we choose a research area. It might appear a very simple, idea that yes, ma'am, whenever we have to write a research paper, obviously we will be choosing a research area. Here, my personal take is that whenever we have to choose a research area, we have to be very clear that whether we are actually involved passionately with the area or not. Otherwise, the reader, whosoever is reading the paper, eventually gets to know that it is just a publication which is being done just to fulfill certain criteria, and the researcher is not involved in the publication. I have realized it with time when I was reading papers that I could clearly see whether the publication is simply because it is to be done. People simply write something, they put the results, and it appears lifeless publication. But at times there can be very less analysis, but the language reflects how the person is really involved in the area. So first suggestion which I would like to give to all the colleagues is that whenever you have to publish, because all of us, when we decide to pursue our doctorate, we always choose one.
Smita ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm so sorry. So should I
Problem,
start
ma'am.
again or?
No, ma'am, it was just for a 1 second, 2 seconds.
Okay, yes. So I would like to repeat, because this is one of those points which I really want to make, that when we have to choose a research area, my personal, you can say, experience and suggestion is that we always choose an area with which we are passionately involved also. Rather than simply publishing for the sake of publishing, if we are writing something in the domain where our heart is also involved, our research paper is going to be interesting. Otherwise, it will just become a document which will help us in getting, you can say, further either promotions, or it will just be part of some library. So first of all, the relevance and interest, both things are equally important. If our heart is involved, the publication is going to be worth reading. Even fellow researchers like to read something which has some amount of applicability and some amount of passion, which gets reflected in the content of the paper. And obviously, this relevance aspect, even UGC now says that the societal impact matters a lot. So it is very important that when we publish something, it has to be slightly relevant. Though what will be relevant and what will not be relevant is highly debatable. Let me confess, like there was a time when in our department, during the RDC, one or two students, they said that they want to work on gender economics. And it has happened that clearly it was decided that no, gender economics is too much of a sociological topic, and at least in India, it has not developed that much. So maybe the study will not be relevant. So I'm not giving this example to tell you whether it is relevant or not, or to start a debate. The idea is that relevant is highly subjective. So what you are, for example, what I am publishing might appear very relevant to me and from my perspective to the society, but whether it is relevant to the person, to the wider audience for which this particular paper is intended. So generally, whenever we have to publish, later on I'll tell you, it also matters where I want to publish it, and whether for that particular audience group that this particular title is going to be relevant or not. So it will be a combination of my interest in the topic, which will reflect my passion, and the relevance for the reader, because I can't just say what is interesting to me should appear interesting to the reader or to the other party also. Secondly, it is very important that because when we say research gap, all of us, whenever we have studied research methodology, we always say, okay, do research in that topic which has never been researched. But at the same time, we ask almost everybody to do extensive review of the available literature also. So again, it is a very, very conflicting combination of very conflicting statements. The thing is that yes, research is taking place. Yes, at times we may see there can be two things. Either we pick an area which really has not been worked upon. That is also true. But at the same time, we can talk about an area where a lot of research is there, but maybe I'm able to find something which no one else has covered. So it is very important that before thinking of writing anything, we actually see how much literature or how much research has already taken place and whether we are able to find some significant research gap which can be worked upon or not. Then yes, practicality, because I'm an economist, and generally in economics it really becomes very important that we have availability of data or not. Here also I would like to share another experience which I am facing now with my present one of the research students who is recently married and is a new mother, and she is very passionate about the topic of care economy. So we started having some type of debates on this particular topic, and a moment came then when she was on the verge of dropping out of her PhD that she said, you will never understand what I am going through and how relevant. I said, now no doubt your passion is getting reflected in your research. The first idea that one has to be interested in the topic one is working on, but how are you going to bring the data? And obviously she did not back out, and she did intensive study, and somehow she managed to find comfortable level of literature, though very less work has been done on this particular domain in India. And when she was convinced that yes, we have data also, then some hope is there that if she actually attempts something, that thing in the long run will contribute, or at least it will get published somewhere. So data availability becomes very important. So no matter how much interested I am and how much relevant socially or personally the topic is to us, whether it can be backed up by something concrete, because otherwise it can be simply labeled as a value judgment, and then the way economic thought is moving, people will simply reject your idea. So you have to somehow convincingly tell that this is what my idea, and I have some evidence to support the idea. And generally it is said that if research, especially if research is taking place through some funding, which if a person is doing research during the doctorate, the person gets fellowship from A or B agency. And if a person is doing research as a faculty member, at times UGC gives grant to publish that particular paper also. So some type of practical value it is expected that the research will have. Then when we start writing a research paper, first thing which comes is how we define a research problem. Research problem is supposed to be clear and specific. When we say clear and specific, even if we have we have a clear vision that this is the broad topic on which we want to work on, it is very important that we put it in very concrete, crisp form on paper so that it makes sense to the reader also. So research problem has to be clear and specific. Obviously, it has to be researchable. Again, this term researchable is a very, very ambiguous term, but generally all the research methodology texts, whatever is available, they say that a problem should be researchable. One can actually debate on it. It has to be time bound. This I'm saying from my own personal experience that yes, it is very important to contribute, it is very important that we think that we have to work in the domains where no one has worked, but at the same time, in today's, just not so that you get some type of benefit from that research, no doubt that is also important, but it is also important that your inner motivation is also maintained. So it becomes important that research is time bound. So if you are writing, for example, paper for a journal, you have to accept that once you have submitted the manuscript, there will be some time gap between submitting and final publishing. There will be revision. Revision can be 1, 2, depending on which journal you are submitting your article, or maybe if you're doing your MPhil or your PhD or any research degree, even dissertation at master's level, obviously there is a time constraint. So one has to be very clear that whatever research topic is being taken to write the research paper, it is clearly connected to the time frame which you have. And generally, it is expected that if any researcher is saying that we are contributing through research, research is original. Though this particular talk is not about plagiarism and what are the consequences or what can be bad consequences of plagiarism, but yes, not when we say original contribution means contribution should be new, but at the same time it should not be mere copy of something which is already there in literature and you simply either change the data or you simply there should be some type of originality that yes, this is what I contributed. Next is we do the review of literature. Here I'll stop and I would like to give one you can say input from my side. Is it possible that we can make this discussion, even if it is in you can say online mode, we can make this particular presentation discussion based, or should I just go one way?
No, ma'am, discussion based would be perfect.
So can I request any?
In case any student would like to ask the question in between, like ma'am has introduced the topics like selecting the broader area, then narrowing down to it further, and then going to the steps of literature review. So the students, you all are requested, in case you have queries in between, you can raise your hands, and you can like ma'am has rightly said, that we can have an interactive session rather than having a one-way delivery. So that
And
will
here,
be perfect.
yeah. And Dr. Suman, can I take liberty of involving you in the discussion? Because when I say that what was the, yes, because this is how one can make it interesting, no? Because
Right,
I'm
ma'am.
aware of you, the faculty colleagues. For example, if
Sure.
when you decided to pursue your MPhil or PhD degree, so
Mhm.
because in the first three slides, I gave the statement that one has to be passionately involved, it has to be useful for the society, it has to be workable, it has to be practical. These are the things which are there in every research methodology book. So can you share your personal take on it? Any problem which you faced when you were choosing your,
Definitely.
yes,
Yes, definitely.
yes.
So, like ma'am has rightly said, that whenever we are trying to identify our research area, the passion must be there. We shall be passionate about the topic that we are choosing. So, basically, my research journey started with MPhil, right? Because at master's level, I did not chose the dissertation part. So, the research journey I picked up at my MPhil level. So that was the time when I was not clear, like how do we decide about the research topic, how do we know, like in what area I want to research upon. So basically in economics there are very like there are many areas that we can pick up. We can work on macroeconomics, we can pick up development economics, or any point related to industry, or any point related to agriculture, so on and so forth. So in my case, when I started with MPhil, so since this is, I think this is common for everybody who is just a beginner in research. So my guide at that time, his expertise was in agriculture. So somehow I ended up taking agricultural economics to be my broader area of research. But then I did my research on a topic in agricultural economics during my MPhil. But then over the period of time, I realized that when we are into research, it is very important that we ourselves decide the area, and then we see, we narrow it down, we specify it further depending upon our passion. So accordingly, my MPhil was done. I got to have a hands-on experience on the steps of research. I did it on the topic of agriculture. But then when it came to my PhD, so that was the time when I was clear in my head, clear in my mind, that now I have to go with the topic that truly matches my passion, like what topic I would like to work on. So that was the time, when I was very much interested that how the dynamics in macroeconomy works, like how do we have expansions, how do we have recessions, why suddenly the level of economic activity drops down at that time, how the government is going to give let's say stimulus to the economy to take it out. So that was, I was really interested in business cycles, to be more precise. So luckily I had my guide, Dr. Nitin Arora. Smita ma'am knows him really well. So his expertise was also in macroeconomics and econometrics per se. So that is how I narrowed down my topic into macroeconomy and then further to business cycles, and then sir helped me in deciding the topic though I decided myself, but sir helped me in deciding the methodology, the econometric tools that we are going to use, so on and so forth. So this is how I decided my research area in case of PhD. I hope. So this is the personal experience that I have shared.
And the most important thing which I picked from your talk was that yes, at times, especially the way research takes place in India, generally it is the supervisor who at times decides the uh,
Exactly.
title, and expertise of the supervisor becomes the expertise of the student. So it is very
Exactly.
important that somehow you are able to make that type of rapport with your supervisor so that some type of consensus can be reached. For example, if I want to work on health and the supervisor is interested in econometrics, so I can
Mhm.
reach some type of middle path. So with the now I like to continue with my thank you, Dr. Suman. Next,
Thank you.
this
Thank you so
thing is
much.
that it is again, as I said in the previous slide, that it is very, very important that there has to be some gap in the existing research, and only then you start thinking that, otherwise the contribution is not going to be, you can say, I won't even use the word original, I would say it won't matter, because if something is already there, you have just added one more variable to the uh, one more, you can say, thesis in the already existing literature, one more research paper in the already existing maybe thousands of research papers. So it becomes very important that you read available existing literature, and then you decide that okay, this maybe this particular thing has not been worked upon, so why not try. But interestingly, why not try, but given the time framework? So it's again a mix of, you have to take a middle path. And then comes, obviously, once you have decided that this is the particular area I have to work on, you'll have to give clear objective. We can, for example, take a random research problem, and then we can decide that this will be the objectives. Then once we have decided objectives, yes, we give further hypothesis, and eventually it is very important that whatever was the original vision in our mind when we were taking the search problem, the objectives and hypotheses have to be connected to it. So let us take a broad, you can say, research problem that, for example, I am working in a public university, and this particular university in which I am giving a talk is a reputed but private university. So if I just start wondering whether the faculty work satisfaction is more in a public university or in a private university, I may give a offhand statement that no, people are happier in public universities because job security is there and salaries are better. But at the same time, I this will be my personal value judgment. It will become, you can say, it will become a researchable problem only if some variable of life satisfaction, maybe because maybe, for example, the private university may be having some variables which are not available, the kind of help they provide to the new mothers, the kind of care they provide to the children of the faculty, the kind of, you can say, ambience they provide to the faculty so that they can interact and work in comfort. So then it becomes very important that my objectives are clearly defined. And then, or because again, we are talking in terms of economics, so I'll change this particular research problem and I will say economically now public universities are no longer viable. I changed my, altogether changed my research, this thing, challenge. So given with this idea that I want to test the viability of government universities, and here if I have to write a research paper on viabilities of government universities in northern India or maybe in India, That will be my vision, that this is on which I have to work on. I'll decide the objective also. So would anybody suggest any hypothesis on it, that what will be the hypothesis? Okay. I'm again, I totally understand because it is comparatively vague. I'll reframe my question, and if you don't choose to answer, I'll answer, and you can, let me know whether you're convinced with the answer or not. Or I'll just leave this example here only. I'll complete my presentation and we'll come back to this particular slide, or anything connected to the forming of research problem and how that problem has to be translated into clear hypothesis. Next is research methodology. Obviously, once we have formed a hypothesis, it has to be backed by, data. So yes, data sources, which method I'm going to use, which analytical, you can say, one of the colleagues just said that yes, it becomes very important that if objective is macroeconomic cycles, then we have to know which econometric tool to use and so on. So now I'll come back to my original, the question which I had given, that if I want to test the viability of government universities in India, whether they are sustainable or not. So first of all, I'll have to clearly define what do I mean by viability. I hope everyone is able to relate to the example, or just let me know, I'll change the example. Viability means, yes, because viability means we are going to do the cost and benefit analysis. So in my mind, I want to see whether cost and benefit wise, whether public universities are moving in such a way that over a period of time, public universities will somehow survive, despite my knowing that in public universities, maybe given that the committed expenditure in terms of salaries or in terms of things which university has to spend money on, maintenance and everything, is much higher compared to the income which comes in terms of fee or any other resource. So if I have decided this particular research problem, I would really be happy if any of the student or any of the colleagues say that what hypothesis can one give. I know this is not a research methodology session, and I totally understand that basically I am supposed to list only the steps of writing a research paper. But it becomes very important that your title and the core objective is so interesting that one feels like reading your research paper. And that is why I want to ask that, or you suggest any alternate title and we will create a methodology for that title. I request please select any other title apart from this which I gave. Dr. Jasmine, can you suggest any topic on which of economics on which one feels like working, and let us create a research problem and hypothesis. So students will give actual live example of how
If, ma'am, we are analyzing the growth in, for example, in the organized sector or unorganized sector, we can say that there is no significant difference in the growth between the two sectors. It can be any sectors.
Yes.
So that can be one hypothesis, null hypothesis.
Exactly. Now, interestingly, the way I said, one has to clearly define. So first, one will have to define what do they mean by organized sector, what do they mean by unorganized sector. In this particular research problem, what will be the scope of organized sector? Which particular definition of organized sector you are going to take, and eventually, if your hypothesis you are giving that there is no change in the growth of organized and unorganized sector, that means no doubt you are taking null hypothesis, but then alternate, either you can take one-sided or you can take the two-sided hypothesis. I was just trying to make it slightly more okay, maybe with time. Okay, next is the structure of a research paper, and you will realize it is nothing but similar to structure of any research report anybody writes. Because if randomly I start writing that this is how people are actually okay, when we come to the structure of research paper, first of all, there is supposed to be abstract. I made a slide on each of the topics, then maybe we'll be able to benefit from it. Abstract, introduction, literature review, methodology, analysis, and conclusion. Generally, the most neglected portion of a research paper is abstract. Rather, I remember even in my this thing, there used to be a time when abstract was not included in the research papers. So what people used to do, they used to give too much importance, and which was very, very I personally used to like that way of writing a research paper, when introduction and eventually conclusion becomes the, you can say, heart of a research paper. Here, because it becomes very important that what you have done or what is your core idea, rather than reading maybe 10 or 20 pages, someone is able to actually gauge what you intend to do, which methodology you choose, and eventually what results you reached upon after following that methodology. So abstract generally includes all those things. And abstract, it is very important that though in the research paper, whenever we read a research paper, abstract is presented in the beginning of the research paper, but abstract is always written in the end of the research paper, because it has to include everything which is there in the research paper, right from what was the problem, the methodology, and eventually the results which you achieved. This is just a sample abstract which I have just picked from somewhere, because I'm from the domain of public finance, so I have written the impact of public expenditure on education and so on. But means it has to be small, you can say maximum 150 to 250 words. No matter which journal you pick, it becomes very important that abstract is not very lengthy, but at the same time, in every line, what you say becomes very, very important. Generally, with every abstract, there are certain keywords also which are given. So there will be 4 to 6 key terms, and it has to reflect what the particular abstract is trying to say. So can we do this exercise that I go back to abstract and you find out, you any one of the students can tell me which keyword should be included here. This is just a
Harika,
random.
Khyati, Anya, where are our students? Anyone from the participants?
Ma'am, it can be a human capital formation, one of them.
अच्छा, एक बच्चे ने आंसर दिया ह्यूमन कैपिटल फॉर्मेशन. यस.
Ma'am, next can be public expenditure.
Okay, one can be public expenditure. Yes.
Ma'am, regression analysis.
Regression analysis. Okay, done. Now I'm just going to take example of these 3 keywords which the students gave. All 3 are correct. Now, interestingly, if I'm writing another, I'm an econometrician and or a statistician, and I want to see whether regression analysis has some applicability in economics or not. So for me, if I put this particular keyword, regression analysis, out of the thousands results which I will get, this particular result will also be there, which would be nothing but the applicability of regression analysis in research in economics. So that particular keyword, it may not have been useful for the economist, but it became useful for the statistician also. Similarly, if I'm I have nothing to do with, say, you can say, I'm not a public finance person. I'm not interested in how government is, spending money and where money is going. I'm a person who is keenly interested in overpopulation and how it can be translated into human capital formation. So suddenly, because the keyword is saying human capital, I'll put it and the abstract will be there, and immediately I'll realize that, okay, if I'm interested in human capital formation, maybe government spending can contribute in it. So are you seeing how you can say parallelly also one's research is helping the other person? So I am working in public expenditure, but the person who is working on human capital formation is also gaining out of it, even if for him it is just a case study or maybe one variable which he finds useful, he or she. And similarly, for a statistician, my quoting that I'm using regression analysis can be useful, that yes, this particular method can be used in, you can say, economics also. You may feel that it doesn't make much sense, but let me share something with you, because all of you must have learned about this Heckscher-Ohlin theory and Leontief paradox.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Yes.
So whenever we study Heckscher-Ohlin theory and we talk about Weasley Leontief, we always say, okay, Leontief somehow empirically tested Heckscher-Ohlin theory, and this is the results he found out, and the paradox is still debated. You'll be surprised to know that Leontief was not that much interested in international trade or in applicability of Heckscher-Ohlin theory. He was a statistician and he was interested in studying input-output analysis. For him to study input-output analysis, the most, you can say, convincing example which appealed to his common sense was, okay, if someone is having factor abundance, the commodity in which the commodity you are trading, you should use that particular, you can say, commodity in which factor abundance and factor intensity is there. So he thought, okay, results are going to be there. It is as simple as law of demand. So for input output, he just picked it. Because at times for example, if I have to teach regression, the most convincing example any teacher will take in the class will be either consumption function, assuming that yes, it makes sense, consumption will depend upon income, or law of demand, that yes, it makes sense that quantity demanded will depend upon price. But suddenly, to his surprise, he realized the results are coming out to be opposite, and the term became popular in international economics as Leontief paradox. But in reality, Leontief was doing input-output analysis. So I think this is one of the best examples how research of one person helps the other domain also. So abstract becomes very important. So had Leontief written an abstract for his study, he would have said that I am testing using this methodology, input-output, which he wanted to say, applicability of action rolling theory. So anybody who is working on international trade has nothing to do with statistical tools or techniques. That person will also get another study to quote, and eventually he got Nobel Prize not for empirically testing action rolling theory, but for discovering input-output analysis. Next are the, you can say, keywords. Keywords, I think we have already discussed. Then is this Journal of Economic Literature Codes, JEL classification, which we always say. Okay, generally, see, American Economic Association, what they do is, for example, if I'm working in the domain of public finance, you may be working in the domain of health economics, someone may be working in the domain of agriculture economics. So some type of standardization is very, very important if we have to do research. One may wonder what is the point of standardization? What if standardization is also not there? For this, I'll give you an example which is not connected to economics, but somehow it really appeals to me as a person. See, for example, when the GST, goods and service tax, had to come, and this particular debate, I was just fortunate to attend this particular debate, that what is the need of this particular tax. And then one particular statement which I heard, it has always stayed with me, and maybe it is more than 15 years. The statement is, it becomes very important to see that what is being defined as good in India is also called a good in USA also. We can't call something a good. Here, good means good and service. I'm good as a commodity, I'm saying. If I'm calling something a good in India, that thing should not be listed as a service in USA. So somehow that is why the service account number and harmonized system of nomenclature started. Standardization makes everyone compare things. Standardization makes comparison, and you can say in case of when I'm talking about good and service, it made GST and its comparability and trade possible. And here when I'm talking about JEL classification, you have to remember one thing, that whenever you are writing a research paper, obviously anybody, even if one is very passionate, whenever you write something, you are very clear that you want someone to read it. If you want someone to read this particular paper, obviously you would like to have wider coverage. So if you have a clear idea that I am working in the domain of agriculture economics, no doubt people of public finance or people of industry can also benefit from that research. But I want other agriculture economists to know what I think as an economist. So what I will do is, I will give you one, please have a look at this particular slide. Is it clearly visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what I will do is, generally I will pick for example, in the human capital thing, the abstract which we just discussed, we can decide. If I'm writing it, obviously my focus is on public economics, and then I'm focusing on, say, fiscal policy. But what if someone is thinking that public economics, but the focus of paper is public economics affecting human resource? So the code will be H. Can you see? H is for public economics.
Yes, ma'am.
And O15 is for human resources.
Yes.
So the moment anybody will see HO15, immediately it means that one is working in fiscal policy, public economics, and eventually its utility for the way human capital formation or creation of human resource. So not only keywords are important, even JEL classification is very, very important. And here I would like to share something which I would say is the evolution of research methodology since we started doing research in MPhil and PhD till date, in old times, abstracts were very important because what we have done 20 years back was we used to go to the library, we used to sit on a PC on which all the abstracts used to be there. That, okay, these are the abstracts of all the PhD theses which have been submitted in Punjab University. And from the abstract, we used to see, from the keyword, we used to see whether we have related research or not. Now, thanks to development of internet and thanks to, I'm not going to use the word AI because now everything is literally available in our hands. These codes and these standardized classifications become very important. Otherwise, there is so much of research and so much of authentic and mixed publications which are available that if you really want to go for, if you want your paper to have a wider coverage, it is very important that you give clear JE classification. That I'm working, for example, in law and economics, even if the paper is connected to, for example, if I write on farm laws, which domain would you like to put it? I'm just, because Dr. Jasmine, I think you were in a law institute earlier. So if I write a paper on, and I'm not teaching a class, I totally understand it. I'm just trying to make it less boring because online that also post lunch can be extremely this thing. Hanji, any
Yes,
paper
ma'am.
on farm law, will it be, it can be in any domain,
It
honestly.
can come under K also, it can come under Q also.
And it can come under, for example, if I want to see how Adam Smith or how Ricardo was interpreting non-government interference and legal system versus how legal system is today, I will put it in economic history. Same thing can be put in law and economics also, yes or no? But it will depend. You are very right that it can come in more than one categories. But for me, which type of audience I want, and if you even if you say I don't care who reads my paper or whether someone reads my paper or not, then let me be very practical and say which journal you want to send your paper for publication. If you are very clear that you are sending your journal, your paper to a journal which is working in political economy, you have to be very clear which JEL classification to give. Okay. This I've just added an example and I've shared this PPT also with Dr. Jasmine. So okay, I think I've already spoken a lot about it. Next comes after JEL classification. Again, I'm repeating in a nutshell. You wrote a paper, you started with defining a research problem, defining a clear objective, giving hypothesis, outlining your methodology, because this particular talk is not about this methodology or that methodology. So I'll just keep it there only. And eventually deriving the results, writing your paper, and on the basis of whatever you have created, right from defining a research problem till reaching your conclusion, writing the abstract of the paper. Once the paper is ready with you, another important component that is known as referencing, that eventually how you acknowledge the sources which you have used. See, it is very important that we read before writing a paper, because in the beginning only I talked about the importance of literature review, but at the same time, this is a common, you can say, it's a cliche term that yes, it is very important to acknowledge from where you have picked any content. Not that you will get some type of plagiarism related blame. No, acknowledging the sources actually increases or decreases the credibility of your research paper. For example, if I say I have published paper X, please read it. It is my request. And you read the paper and suddenly you realize that all the readings which I have picked up, they are just random publications from random journals, and you are just wondering that which literature did she review? Did she actually see the established journals? And the question will come, which journals are established journals? And that is where the role of standardization comes into picture, because journals also have to maintain their report. And here, therefore, it is very important that you acknowledge the sources. And on personal level, I would like to say, if you have not taken or read a particular, even if you have read only abstract, now it is an accepted thing, then you can add the name in your reference. But if you have not read the paper, if you have not even seen the particular paper, please do not add it in your referencing, because in the long run, it will get reflected in your research paper.
I think we
Excuse
have.
me, ma'am.
Yes,
Ma'am, I had a question
Hanji,
that
please.
how extensive should our literature review be such that we're sure that this area of research hasn't been worked on yet?
You are very right, Vijay, because otherwise there is so much of literature available that there is no standardized answer to it. But generally, the conventional practice is that a minimum of 30 studies you should have seen. Are you satisfied with the response?
All right, ma'am.
And a
Thank you.
minimum of 30, it can be more because there is so much literature available that at least 30 studies you should see before writing. And again, this 30 figure also depends on which level of research you are doing. But generally, even if you are simply applying for any PhD admission, or you are simply writing your MPhil thesis or even postgraduate research, at least minimum of 30 studies. And it is not difficult these days. Can I move further?
Yes, ma'am.
Hanji. So acknowledging sources and avoiding plagiarism is very important. And when we have to reference, generally students ask which method of referencing is, we can say that these days this is going on. It will depend on the journal in which you are submitting your paper. There is no these days this is popular or this is popular. Generally, there can be your own individual preference also. But if you are sending, say, paper to EPW, they will take APA. If you're sending to some other journal, they will take some other referencing style. This particular portion is especially for the students only because all others have already, I think, done this. I'll skip. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Majority of the participants are students only.
यही है
Graduates
हाँ जी
only. Yes, ma'am.
तो सबसे पहले first of all I would like to talk upon the APS style of referencing because see names full form may not even I remember when one of the students, my own I think every student had asked me that why psychological association, what are we doing here? It is just a standardized that let us pick the referencing, and generally referencing should be clear so that one is able to see that yes, for example, if a paper from Amrita Sen 2009 study has been taken, the way will be first you write the surname, say Sen, comma, a dot, year of the study, name of the book, the publishing house, and so on. These days there are very, you can say many software are available which will create very nicely referenced list for you. You can say Mendeley and so on, but it is very important that you cross-check it because all the softwares are same as any AI tool. They will give you a result, but it is very important that you cross-check the result. If any student wants to ask any details only, then I'll elaborate on it. Second is modern language association. Are you noticing the difference between APA and MLA and so on? I just want students to notice it. It doesn't matter which referencing style you use. Generally, it will simply depend upon, rather if you go to any search engine, for example, JSTOR, etc. Generally, when you click on the journal paper and they say, okay, which referencing method you put your own referencing style that yes, I need this paper cited, but in APA format or in MLA format and so on. Idea is nothing but standardization and to make the research clear and more available for the later researchers also. And it really helps in, I won't talk about cross-referencing, but in curbing the, you can say, wrong referencing. Then is Chicago style. Are you seeing the difference? Again, all these are...
Excuse me, ma'am. Could you please specify the reference again? Means the difference between APL and MPL.
Difference? Okay. See, first of all, for example, I wrote a research paper and I took 3 studies. Let me simplify the example. I can see names on my screen. One is Dr. Jasmine Kaur. One is, let's assume, Dr. Anusha Verma. And one is Dr. Anya. I have to quote them. So when we have to say that we picked a study titled Growth of Economics in Amity University, if I have to quote it, this 2015 study, who has done the study, in which year the study is done, that is known as referencing, if I have read that study, number one. Secondly, which method to choose for referencing will depend upon the journal in which I am submitting the manuscript. There is one cannot say that APA is best and MLA is second. No, you simply have to see where you want to submit your paper, and generally every paper has editorial guidelines, and according to it, you will choose your referencing style. When you are asking me about the difference, obviously, I'm just showing you 2 slides. Please notice how Amrita Sen has been, and his book Development as Freedom has been listed here in APA. And at times, same reference can appear very, very similar in 3 different styles. Can you see?
Yes, ma'am.
Hana? वैसे I can find one mistake. They should have freedom is supposed to have capital F, but that's okay. Now, same study in this MLA style referencing.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Hana? In both the studies, obviously, you know it is same study of 2019, and this is the name of the book, because obviously, Hana? And obviously, referencing style will vary whether you are using a book or a journal or any other source. Similarly, there are other referencing styles also. Hana? Then comes another thing which is known as bibliography. I want you to notice the 5th, you can say, bullet point, that what is the difference between bibliography and referencing. If you remember, when I was telling you about references, I said please cite or quote only those papers which you have actually studied. Generally, in bibliography, even wider coverage is given. For example, if you have worked on, say, trade cycles in India for a given point of time, while doing the research, you may have referred to 50 different studies. That will be part of your references. But if you are aware of, say, 30 more studies which have been done in trade cycles in the past few years, though you feel that they are not contributing or maybe directly applicable to your particular research problem, you can put them in your bibliography. So is the difference between referencing and bibliography is clear to everyone, or should I repeat it?
Yes, clear.
Clear? Obviously, when we say about good referencing practices, you can't do that one saying I will quote in APA, and maybe if I have to quote Adam Smith, I'll quote in some other referencing style. Whatever referencing style you have chosen, make sure that all the references are given in the same style. Secondly, it is not only the written, at times we pick, say, one definition from one source if we feel that giving definition is very important and it will make our argument even stronger. And then we suddenly realize that Government of India has published, or anybody has published a report in this year which has huge credibility, maybe World Bank report or Government of India report, and this particular table will also contribute a lot. Then you have to quote World Bank publication also and Government of India publication also. So make sure whatever, be it written content, be it table, be it graph, be it map, you have to put it in your you have to cite it in your referencing. So cite all table, graphs, and figure. Obviously, journal referencing, it is conventionally said, because this particular PPT is, you can say, I'll just picking whatever the search methodology, latest edition was there. So obviously the argument that latest edition or books and journals should be used, so that if any change is required, it has already been incorporated with by the author also. And apart from actually citing the source in the end of the research paper, make sure that if I am quoting same, then I will say same 1977 or 19, and then I will write his argument or quote, depending on whether I'm just elaborating on his idea or I'm quoting his idea. And in the end of your paper, eventually, same 1977 publication has to be given. That means you have to mention the source with the text also, with the tables also, and with the figures also, especially if you are taking tables and figures directly from some other author. If you are doing it yourself, then you can always say calculated by the author. It's very important that you number and title each table correctly. This may appear a very, you can say, simpler statement that is it even needed to be included in this style? But given that in PhD Viva, this is one of the major things which gets pointed out with the examiners are that sources are not properly mentioned. There are no clear tables, and you have not clearly shown what is on x-axis, what is on y-axis, what this blue line is showing, what this red line is showing, or what these dots are showing, what is outlier, what is not. Tables are supposed to be relevant and readable. And there's another thing apart from, you can say, references and bibliography, that is the idea of note. If you are building an argument and you know that Here also I'll give an example which just came to my mind. I have a student who's working on Lahaul Spiti, on the irrigation system in Lahaul Valley, which is based on small rivulets which are known in traditional language, and even in Hindi the word is kul only, KULH. So she went through extensive literature and very reputed journal studies, and everybody has quoted the word kul. So if somebody is reading that study sitting in, say, Tamil Nadu or Canada, obviously for them it is very important that one explains what is the meaning of kul. What do you mean when you are writing the word kul? Or I can say another terminology, Punjabiyat. I can make a very strong argument in favor of Punjabiyat, but I'll have to explain what do I mean by Punjabiyat. Even if so, it becomes very important that if some term is coming in my core idea means my research topic is irrigation in Lahaul Valley, and one of the way is kul, then I'll have to explain the word kul. I hope it is clear to the students.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
And obviously conclusion means you summarize your findings, and generally because in the beginning only it becomes important that whenever you do any type of study, it has to have some type of minimum applicability. So yes, policy suggestions have to be there. Generally whenever you feel like working on a particular topic and you say yes, I'm passionately involved, you have that conviction also that some type of change this particular research will bring. So policy suggestions generally come out of it. Now we also talk about societal impact also, though it has a broader, you can say, notation. With this, the particular presentation is over. Uh, can I ask one last question, and then I'll be answering your question after this entire PPT. And the question is, roughly I had given one abstract, public expenditure, government expenditure, and how it will lead to human capital formation. So had it been your research paper, what policy suggestion, what societal impact you would show from that research? And repeat, the research paper which you wrote from introduction with a proper conclusion, using all the tools, 1, 2, 3, you kept on tick marking all the tools, and eventually you said, okay, I've written a flawless paper, it is ready to be published. And at the last moment, the editor said, please add societal impact to it. Can I go back to the abstract and will you answer me what societal impact you can see from this?
We can look at the impact of public expenditure on employment.
Hanji. But here now, because you are very right, ma'am. But when UGC is saying that you have to show about impact on society also, so add one more line, will you?
So basically, the policy implication would be that how important this expenditure is going to be for ensuring long-term economic growth. So it is going to contribute educational resources. They are going to contribute to the longer-term economic growth of the nation.
Or
Hanji. So
maybe
Dr. Suman and
on
Dr.
economic
Jasmine, both of
welfare.
you have are very clear about the economic
Economic
aspect.
impact.
But
Yes.
what if UGC sends back, what if the journal sends back your paper by saying that what about society? Money will increase, economies will grow, so what? How will it benefit the society? Because I gave one statement, the societal impact is a very ambiguous term.
But ma'am, improvement in living standards of
Exactly.
the individual is
So
also
growth is going
right
to give way
progress.
to development over the period of time.
So in a way, the idea of UGC by adding this particular variable of societal impact is that maybe then you will think about the applicability of your research in terms of its wider coverage also, that how a common man or how the generally we economists are conditioned, and I'll accept for me it gets very difficult when I'm sitting with my students. Even I think you must also be guiding PhD students now. When you are sitting with your student and you start thinking, okay, what will be the societal impact of this particular research? Then to actually put it in words becomes very, very difficult. This is the latest difficulty, which at times I keep on wondering how it will actually contribute to the society. So that is why this component that not only you have to talk about the policy implication of your research, because so far no research journal is forcing for societal impact. But because UGC is now saying 2025 that it has to be part of, I think 2024, your PhD thesis, a portion on societal impact has to be there. So maybe eventually they're going to ask in the journals also that after conclusion, please write a line or two or maybe a para or two about this contribution to the society and obviously the policy implication.
Because that is going to validate the relevance of the study.
Yes, this is what the UGC believes.
And for example, if the government is spending on hygiene, on promoting hygiene, for example, so would that come under societal impact?
Obviously, hygiene will come under
That would come under,
but what if government is actually spending on employment creation or human capital?
because that would actually help in human capital formation. Also, it would help in improving the quality of the human beings. Maybe it would. I hope.
That is quality human being will be more aware. So maybe he'll be able to be a more socially responsible citizen. So
Right.
that impact on the society, or maybe good job.
Basically, the implication part will come as the societal impact.
Actually, the argument of UGC is that if there can be difference between output and outcome. I'll just elaborate it. I hope I'm not, making it too lengthy.
No,
Generally, if iron deficiency is there, so whenever researchers were asked, what did you do? The researcher were used to say, we went to the field and we saw what methods government is taking to reduce anemia. So our research used to show through tables that this much money was spent, this many tablets of iron were distributed to these children of this age group. That is output, clearly quantifiable. This is how we do research in economics. But whether anemia actually reduced or not, whether quality of life improved or not, because iron deficiency is no longer a problem, that will be outcome. So government now says that not only policy implication is important, that yes, your research can get translated into policy. It is also important that that policy is worth implementing. So element of societal impact has to be there. If you, I would really like to request students that if they get time, please read UGC notification on societal impact also. So with this, my particular talk is over. I hope I was able to contribute whatever little bit I did.
Niharika, do you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. Firstly, very good afternoon, ma'am. I'm
Good
Niharika,
afternoon, Niharika.
and I'm currently in my 8th semester. Firstly, thank you so much for this wonderful session. I
Thank you.
have like 2 to 3 questions, and one of them is, firstly, what mindset shift is the most important, but at the same time very difficult when moving from textbook economics to research economics?
Wow. Okay.
And then the second question is, what is the most common mistake that we as students make while framing the research question that reviewers or guides can immediately spot? Like for us, that research question would be 100% correct. It would not be imitating any other research question. But at the same time, expert reviewers like you and our guides can spot them immediately, and that can hinder our research. So what are those common mistakes while framing the research question? And the last question is, what is the biggest methodological weakness that you see in students' research paper related to the methodology?
Okay, Vijay.
Thank you,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Thank you, Bete. I just loved your first question, and I don't know whether I'll be able to do justice to it or not. But generally, when we say that how to shift our mindset from textbook economics to actual applied, you can say economics, which which relates to society or to real world. The thing is, this is something which I never did as a student. Student means when I was doing my masters and everything. I feel whatever theory we are studying in class, it is very important that we wonder about its practical applicability also. And generally, I think 100% of the teachers will be more than happy to answer you if you ask them in the class that, ma'am, what is the practical applicability of this particular theory? They'll tell you, even if there are a set of assumptions, how this theory makes sense, because every theory has some basis, only then it is being taught till date. So yes, there can be only way can be that whatever you do, it can be as simple as law of demand, which I quoted, or it can be something very trade cycles or any theory which someone is teaching us, or say Tobin's theory of money. You can come and wonder how it is actually affecting the real world, and then you will realize and I'm saying this very confidently, that 100% of economics which we study actually applies to the real world. So the way of changing is only to ask a question, try to answer it yourself, or to ask your teacher for that. That what is the practical applicability of this particular theory. Second, your question was that what are the mistakes which examiners or supervisors are able to immediately find. I'll answer it on the basis of the PhD interviews which we conduct when we have to select the candidates for PhD. The biggest challenge or the problem which we all face while selecting the candidates is that the students generally pick something which is in I'm not able to get the proper term, in fashion, or which is going on today. So they immediately say we want to study AI and drones. They have to see, it is important to study something which has just come, but at the same time, if you have to do research, I'm not saying something has to be obsolete so that it can be worked upon. So either you challenge the theory, or you provide the alternate theory, or you empirically test the theory. Generally, the way PhDs or research is conducted in India, we empirically test a theory. And to empirically test something, you have to have some data. That means the policy after a period of time. For example, whether NEP is successful in India or not. I think 3 or 4 students presented this in our PhD admission this January only, because it becomes very easy to contradict the applicant that NEP has just come. How can you say whether it works? Even if it is confusing you, it can be a temporary shock, or in the long run it can smoothen out. Or maybe even if you are very, very convinced, in long run it can totally distort the education system. So few things need time. So I would advise, whenever you have to write a research paper, rather than picking a topic which appears to be okay, very contemporary, too much in fashion, you have to see whether it is actually extension of some existing thought or not. And then how, because then it will become easier to actually gain out of that research, means bring something on the table. Otherwise, it will just be will be a value judgment without any, you can say, data to support it. Or you confidently say that we want to do thought-based research, but the way economics is studied and taught in India, it is not very successful in India. That I'm just countering something only on the basis of my argument. Yes, that is also research, dialectical, thesis and antithesis, but in India, economics maybe sadly is not studied that way. And Betty, your third question was methodological weakness, and I think here I'll answer on the basis of my personal, and now maybe AI has solved little bit of this problem many times. And many of my colleagues who are sitting here will agree, many times we just use the methodologies because we know how to use them. But it becomes very difficult for the researcher himself to interpret the results. And immediately it gets, the examiner, whenever he or she comes from PhD Viva, immediately they catch it that the person has applied software or many tools, but he doesn't know. So again, it has happened that generally a person is giving a PhD Viva, and the person is saying we used time series method, and I calculated 3 yearly moving average. And if someone asks why 3 yearly, what was the need of calculating moving average, the person is not knowing the answer because he knows the methodology, the formula of calculating moving average. I'm taking a very basic example because if undergraduate students are also there. So you have to know why we are using this methodology. But now lately, my own PhD students are telling me, ma'am, just give a command to AI and they tell you that how the results will be interpreted, and the interpretation will be literally flawless. So I don't know what to say for that.
Okay,
I
ma'am. Thank you so
thanks.
much.
Thank you. Anji, I think Anya.
Ma'am, can we have more questions in case you have time?
One last question I can take, and
One
then I
last
have to
question.
go somewhere for the
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Only one last question. Khyati? Anya?
So,
Anyone?
good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Kathy.
Good afternoon, ma'am. First of all, I want to thank you for conducting such a beautiful and informative session for us.
Thank
So, my question is, ma'am, like I am in my last semester of my master's and I have my dissertation as a compulsory. So, my question is that how can a student handle data limitations without weakening their research?
Kathy, it's a very good question, and I would say because every student when they start research, they get a supervisor also, no? So your guide will make sure very gently that you take the right direction. Because if someone is just starting the research, this is my personal take that one cannot do unguided research as a beginner. You have to have someone that who gently tells you that this can be done, and obviously there will be, you can say, discussion, there will be arguments and counter arguments, not fight but discussion. But then one convincing, without guide, without the support of someone who has already been through this, I don't think it is possible to write a dissertation.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
So let us hope you get a good guide.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. It
Thank
was
you,
a
Dr.
pleasure
Jasmine.
listening to you today.
And
Old
it is a
memories.
pleasure seeing all of you again. I'm so happy.
We are blessed, ma'am. And
Yes, definitely, ma'am. It is like nostalgia is hitting us. So feeling very, very
Even I'm
nostalgic.
also feeling the same, Suman. And you are okay. It's a formal this thing, but you just look like the way you used to look when you were a student. Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am, we need to have like in-person meeting.
Yeah, please spare time and come to department. We'll have a cup of tea.
Definitely, ma'am, definitely.
Thank you.
thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out
Yes.
time for this
Thank you,
session
Jasmine. Thank you
from
so
your
much.
busy schedule.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Jasmine.
much,
Thank you,
ma'am.
Suman.
Thank you
I
so
would like to add to this, like you have simplified, like you have stressed so much upon all the elements, the entire structure of a research paper. So our students, they must be, feeling really enthusiastic to start writing something actually. So you have like clearly defined the importance of abstract, the importance of endnotes, references, different types of references. So we are truly, truly grateful to you, ma'am, for finding time for us.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Jasmine.
much, ma'am.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
ma'am.
much. Thank you, Dr. Jasmine. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, participants. Thank you, all the faculty members who've joined for the session.
May I ask everybody to switch on the video once so that I can take a picture? All the students, may I ask you to start your video? I think, ma'am, if you can stop sharing your screen, everybody will be
Okay.
visible.
Acha, I did realize, I'm very bad at Hanji. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Rajiv,
Doctor.
sir.
Hanji.
Thank you, Rajiv, sir, for joining.
Hanji. Thank you, Rajiv, sir. Hanji. Bye. Good evening. Bye.
Thank you to all the faculty and the participants who've joined the session. So we are ending the session. Thank you. Thank you, the technical staff also, for the smooth conduct of this lecture. Thank you.